So I started off my environmental career as a young child, like probably most of you, exploring the woods and the lakes and the Hudson River in New York. And I'll end with something from the Hudson River on this presentation. But I also want to say, and I have been in elected office. I have had a small business. So I've had a little bit of a lot of different opportunities in my life. I'm incredibly honored that Chris asked me to do a presentation on zero waste. I've been pretty passionate about it for about 15 years now. So without further ado on that, I'll go into the presentation. And I believe this will be put online. So I do have I do put in a lot of words on some screens, so don't worry about it. I'm not going to read everything, but I like to have that available in case you want to go back, not listen to it necessarily, but just flip through it. I know all of our time is very valuable, and I hope that this will be a good use of your time. So in terms of our circular economy, what do we mean by zero waste? This is a screen you've seen before. I think I did a presentation on recycling and composting, and this is a screen I really enjoyed. But this next one, let's see if I can get this to move. Is it going? Oh, sorry. So this next one is a little bit better. The linear economy, I'll start with that, is where we just produce something, we sell it, we use it, and then we put it to disposal, like incineration or landfilling. But in a circular economy, you go from producing to selling to using, except there's a lot of different feedback loops within each one of these. So it stays, the product in some fashion stays within the system. And that saves a lot of that embedded energy and water. So mainly with zero waste, we're concerned about that savings of energy and water and resources. And a lot of times we'll ask, what do we do with the waste that's created? And I wonder sometimes whether that's the right question. So in nature, you guys, all are a lot of environmentalists here, and I'm so glad to see a banker here. That's fantastic. So all of our, it's good not to just be kind of preaching to the choir as far as environment goes, because zero waste is really great for just everybody, regardless. So waste in nature is not usually present. So a lot of people will say it's a human design flaw. So for example, with an oak tree takes in sunlight and water, takes in resources, gives out oxygen, takes in carbon dioxide. Through the roots, it lets, with nutrients, takes them in, improves the soil. And then for animals, of course, acorns go for food for squirrels. Squirrels, have it through their body. They and they excrete it, and then it, that nutrients go back into the soil. So it is a circular loop. So there's not really a lot of waste in nature. So zero waste, this is kind of the definition, a peer-reviewed definition of zero waste. And it's the first part of it talks about really responsible production, consumption, reuse and recovery of products, packaging, and materials without harming the environment, which includes the human and natural environment. And the second part of it is the really important part, is that it is a goal to guide people in changing lifestyles and practices to emulate nature so that we aren't wasting, so we keep everything within that loop and we save the energy and the water in those embedded products. So we like to say it's a journey and not a destination. And zero waste, actually, the term is very, we saw in our group in the discussion, the term can be very difficult because a lot of people get hung up on the zero part of it. And when people say zero waste, they really mean you're trying to get to about 90% diversion from the waste stream, from going to a landfill or incinerator, or actually landfill for zero waste. So my journey started in Frederick County, Maryland. I live in Brunswick. And in about 2008, 2007, 2008, our county was planning to build a waste to energy facility instead of long hauling our trash to Virginia and different areas. We were running out of landfill space like so many countries and municipalities and counties. And instead of long hauling that, we were talking about the benefits of mass burn incineration. So a lot of residents started really looking into this and thinking this is not the direction we want to go. And so we started just asking, what are the benefits and what are the downsides of landfilling as opposed to incineration? And we had a longtime Frederick Countyan, and I'll just name Caroline as her name, and she had moved to Boulder, Colorado years before, and she raised her family there. She went to Colorado University. She raised her family there, and she lived a zero waste lifestyle. So she came back to the county commissioners in Frederick County and pretty much said, why not zero waste? Why don't you at least look at zero waste? You've been on a field trip to Paris to look at their incineration. Why don't you come to Boulder and I'll show you around. And so she arranged a week-long trip to Boulder, Colorado for several politicians and for solid waste advisory board members, and then a couple of citizens. And I was one of those really interested citizens. I really wanted to learn more about this. So we headed to Boulder. So when we were there, the first person we talked to was Eric Lombardi, and he is the former executive director of EcoCycle. EcoCycle is an organization out there that pretty much spearheads a lot of the zero waste programs and policies, practices and things. And so we went to the materials recovery facility, their recycling center, and he gave us a great talk. And he sat us down and I was asking, or several of us were asking, is an incinerator better than a landfill? And he started the conversation saying, well, incinerating mixed trash is really a waste of energy because those are commodities that you're burning. And in order to get the fuel needed, to run the plant, you need high BTUs, and that's the plastics, and that's a lot of materials that would interfere, so to speak, with recycling. You're not getting all the recycling out before you're burning mixed trash. Plus, you're burning a lot of electronics and things like that. So he pretty much feels it's a waste of energy. And he said all landfills leak. And he went into the terrible, the dire consequences of landfills. And I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, Eric, you're supposed to be saying like landfills are better than incineration. But he wasn't. He was saying they're both horrible. So we realized, my aha moment kind of was sitting there with him and realizing we're asking the wrong question. We should be saying, how do we create the least amount of waste to dispose of, regardless of the final disposal mechanism? So the answer to that question was to reduce the amount of waste we create to as close to zero as possible. So in our week-long trip, I'll go through this pretty quickly, but we went all over Boulder, and Boulder is a zero waste community. So they really embrace the concept. Not every single citizen, you're never gonna have that, but the community, the elected officials, which is where you really need the political will. And Chris and I probably share the same thoughts about political will with many of you these days, but it's difficult. It's very difficult to get that political will. But anyway, we did go to the recovery facility. So he gave us a tour of how that works. We went to a facility called CHARM, and that's the Center for Hard to Recycle Material, where they take all kinds of materials. Like you can't put everything through a materials recovery facility. You can't take hard plastics like swimming pools. You can't do styrofoam blocks. You can't do shoes. You can't do, that are shoes that aren't good enough for Goodwill, but can still be, taken apart and recycled, reused. So CHARM was a really neat place. Western Disposal is the hauling company. we went down, we actually sat down with the executives as well as seeing, some of their facilities and things. But we sat down with all the executives, and these are businesses. So this is not a pie in the sky thinking. This is not just we're doing this for saving the environment. This has got to make economic sense. And so they talked to us about how they set up their system. They have a 3 bins. I think they have 3 bin system out in Boulder, but they have different sizes of carts, and they'll charge like X and 2X and 3X for their carts sizes. So you can choose to throw out as much as you want, but you're going to pay for it. So that's the kind of the pay-as-you-go system that Boulder has. We got a talk by somebody from eco products, and so that's all about the products, packaging and materials, which is a huge issue in zero waste. We went to a couple of zero waste restaurants. They showed us how in the kitchen they actually can make it very easy for the employees and staff. They have to train them don't put any plastics or anything in that container, because they're going to take that container out and put it in the back in the dumpster here, where they are going to come pick it up for composting to take it to a compost facility. So it's very simple. It's not hard at all, very simple. And then we ended up talking to a lot of city, county government staff about the different policies that they had to set up throughout the community. And then also within their buildings, they have to show, they have to practice what they preach. And so they had to practice, a lot of different policies, create a lot of policies and practices for the government itself. And then we went to Boulder County, the jail. So the jail in the back has 2 of these large composting in vessel machines, which actually you can see the size of them. Here's a gentleman here. I can't remember if they were 15-ton, or I can't remember the size of them. But anyway, you put the food scraps in there. So they would collect food scraps in their kitchen, and then they would dump the food scraps in here, and you get 3 people to walk around actually to stir that. They had where you could hold on and kind of walk around to actually manually stir those food scraps. And so they do that twice a day. They'd use it for their gardens and everything. So they are composting in the jail, county jail. Resource is like Habitat for Humanity, Restore, our Restore facilities. A lot of you know they're a place where you can do, where the builders will go and developers will go to get windows and doors that were taken down, deconstructed from sites instead of just broken up and stuff. They deconstruct buildings. And that actually is one of the policies in the government too, as far as, I believe, as far as when you take down a building, you have to salvage. A certain material has to go towards, salvage materials, not just destroying it. So toilets, doors, windows, all kinds of great things were available here. We went to Zero Waste Hotel. We stayed in a Zero Waste Hotel, and then we visited a 5-star Zero Waste Hotel, which is pretty amazing. We went to a Green Star. They have public schools. The public schools there, several of them are Green Star schools. This is one of the interests why I'm so interested in Joe Richardson's Lunch Out of Landfills program. Fantastic. You got it. We got to teach the kids. I think we were talking about that a little bit before this presentation. We got to teach the kids how to compost and how important composting and proper recycling is. So we went there and we saw how they did that. And then last but not least, we went to the University of Colorado Stadium, and they showed us, we got a kind of behind the scenes tour of how they did the recycling and composting and how they brought that to the stadium. And then the second part of my training was my friend Caroline and I flew up to Boston, Massachusetts, and we took a 2-day course with Gary Liss, who was one of the original inventors, creators of zero waste. And we had a great conversation with him. He talked about how difficult that term was. So they did agonize over that term. But they really decided, how much waste do we want? We want zero. I mean, that is our goal. So the whole term, as far as being a goal, not just the destination of, we're never going to have zero, but as close to zero as we possibly can get. And then we headed back to Frederick, Maryland. And I remember driving back from the airport thinking, we got to get Gary to come out to Frederick to do this class and to teach people about zero waste. And then I realized, both of us realized on the trip back there, no, he can't go everywhere. We have to go back and teach zero waste. So that's what I'm kind of hoping with you guys, that you guys will go back to your communities and you will, whenever you hear that term zero waste, which we're hearing more and more, you will explain it to people that say, oh, we can't ever get to zero waste, but you'll explain to them, what does it really mean? So we went back, we had political battles are difficult. I've been an activist. I know many of you are probably have activist blood in you too. You're doers. And so we did go back, we did read the contract. The way this incinerator proposal was defeated ultimately was because the economics of it did not work. And it was going to cost Frederick County and Carroll County, the neighboring Carroll County, so much more money than it was ever going to help them. And they found that through the contracts. So anyway, but to start with, we had to be kind of in the face of the politicians. We had to go, we had to advocate, we had to read, we had to know what we were talking about and do all the research so that we could give good public testimony. There were a lot of people that did not want to be involved in that part of this. And that was absolutely fine. So we came back and we started a non-political group called Waste Not Frederick and Waste Not Carroll. And that was for the people that just really wanted to learn more about and expound on the recycling, composting aspects of what zero waste was. So in introducing the term to Frederick, and we had a lot of people say, oh, that's pie in the sky, we'll never get there. We had a lot of that. So we showed them through events how you can compost a lot of the material, how you can recycle a lot of material. And we had a lot of fun with it. And we got in the newspapers a lot for silly pictures like these. So we really did make it fun. And we had a huge group of people that really wanted to be involved that way. So since those days, the term has become much more mainstream. EPA, if you go to EPA, they have a whole group about how communities have defined zero waste. It is not exactly the same way in all communities, and it is not the exact same way that ZERI, that first definition, defines it. There's sometimes you'll hear zero waste to landfill, and that is actually kind of code for incineration, which is really frustrating, but it's okay. As long as we're all moving towards creating as little waste as possible. We're going to disagree on some of the techniques and stuff, but we're still moving in the right direction. So this is New York City has gone ahead and started zero waste design guidelines. And a lot of communities are defining, and whole countries are going towards zero waste resolutions. So in the zero waste hierarchy from this group, ZWIA, Zero Waste International, obviously this first part you guys all know very much about. This is the first part before you even get to producing things. You're going to rethink, you're going to redesign products. You're going to reduce as much as you can up front. You're going to do energy conservation, things like that up front before you're spending any time or money on the products. You're going to reuse as much as possible too. And then you get to the disposal. Well, actually reuse is disposal too. So you can take things to Goodwill and reuse, bags over and over again and whatnot. And then you get to disposal. So recycle and compost is next. A lot of people think we're doing so great because we're recycling things. There you are, but there's a lot before that you can do also. Material recovery is a really interesting, and residuals management is really, really interesting. Material recovery is what's left over. After you've done all that you can, what is left over? What's still going to the landfill? What's still going to incinerators? Well, in zero waste, it's not what's going to incinerators, but what's going to landfill. And this material, the residuals management is a huge industry right now. It's really cool. And a lot of people are looking at this and saying like, what is totally left and what can we do to either get rid of it or to redesign it? So it's a really interesting field right now. In zero waste, highest and best use practice is critical. So you're trying to save as much of that embedded energy and embedded water as possible. It takes a lot of energy and water to create products. You want to save that as much as possible. I'm sorry, I live in a railroad town in Brunswick, so you're going to hear the train behind me a little bit here. And then life cycle analyses are what you use to determine those uses. You're going to look long-term, in other words. So guiding questions for zero waste hierarchy, these are the questions we should be asking, not just what do we do with the waste? We should be thinking with the redesigning, what led us to the present linear use of the materials, and what needs to evolve to move more towards that circular economy. And then how do we redesign whole systems to avoid that wasteful consumption? Reducing, we need to ask, like, what supports the use of less material and specifically less toxic material? So we want to get as much toxicity out of the environment as possible. Reuse, we want to say what supports better use of the products we already have in those ways that can retain that value, usefulness and function, that embedded energy and that embedded water. How do we support the better use of that? Also, how do we get people to get it to a reuse facility? That's a big issue. How do we encourage people to take things to Goodwill instead of throwing your toaster in the trash? Perfectly good toaster, take it to Goodwill. How do we get people encouraged to do that? The same question we can ask for recycling and composting. How do we get people, how do we ensure that those materials are put back in the material stream? How do we get people to recycle properly? How do we get them to compost? And then material recovery, what was salvaged from that mixed waste? And then residuals management, these two kind of go together, but residuals management really asks, what is still left and why is it there? What do we need to take out of the system that shouldn't have been there in the first place, like styrofoam? We need to just ban some things. So we need to just get some things out of the system instead of trying to figure out how to make petroleum, how to make fuel out of them necessarily. I'm not saying that all technologies, I'm very interested in flexible technologies. But there's some things we just need to get out of the system. Polystyrene is, in my opinion, is definitely one of them. And then how do we manage what's left in a flexible manner that continues to encourage movement towards zero waste? In other words, like sometimes it's better to stockpile a certain type of plastic or a certain, cardboard. If good OCC cardboard, if the commodities market is down and you're not able to make profit on that, maybe you stockpile it for a little while until that commodities market goes up. Recyclables are a commodity and they change value just like any other commodity. And so it's important to look at them as resources and not just as waste. So there's a lot of communities that are moving towards, I said before, zero waste plans and resolutions. This is actually, this presentation, if you want a really great presentation on zero waste, this is about 70 slides. Ruth Abbey is an amazing person. She's a leader in the field and she has got a great presentation. I can put that in the chat afterwards too, if you want. But this is, and I can't remember, she gave this talk to Berkeley, California, and I think this was like 2015. So I know there are more zero waste communities in the US and also other countries too. There's a whole nother list for countries. This slide I just put into the presentation recently because it came across my desk. This was for an RFP. I want to show you zero waste. That term is becoming so much more mainstream that actually people are putting it in their RFPs for work that's done. This was done for actually city of Baltimore, was asking in engineering consultants and engineering companies to put in a bid for a proposal that they wanted. They wanted to know what kind of background, experience, knowledge the companies had in waste to energy, in landfilling, in general recycling, in biosolids and organics like composting. But then they did add this sustainable materials management, circular economy, zero waste. So they are, I wanted to show you that they really are, they do need to know, engineering companies, consultants need to be trained in zero waste. So they really need to understand there's a different way, there's another opportunity there to go. The next 3 slides are just going to be some quick things I showed. I wanted to show about how it's becoming much more mainstream. We were talking about this before this presentation started, before we started at 9, about how it's becoming, more people are talking about this. And it really is a wave of young people, especially, rethinking waste and rethinking energy. And so some of these slides, Amelie, there's a rethink food waste down there for you. So that is a huge thing in Rotary now. We are really doing a lot of work with rethinking food waste and a lot of different things. Green Homes Challenge was a program Frederick County has started about energy conservation in your home. To start there before you would think about putting new windows in your house, look at your conservation in your house as it goes now. So reduce, reuse, reduce food waste, don't throw leftovers out, go to thrift stores. As a politician, I went to a lot of meetings, and a lot of places give out plastic. We'll use plastic utensils. So I've brought these, carried these for the last, I'd say 12, 15 years. And I use them instead of plastic. And I don't know, I have not calculated how much waste I have prevented in plastic silverware, but I mean in plasticware, but a lot. And then also a lot of people, a lot more people, you'll see them carrying water bottles, to reuse water bottles. And this gentleman up here said, let's shower together and save the world. So there's there's all kinds of ways you can reduce and reuse. Recycle and composting. These 3 signs are becoming much more, you'll see them a lot more. The 3-bin system, recycling, composting, and trash. So the green, blue, and black, you'll see a lot more of. Mattresses can be recycled now. Car companies are building so that they can be deconstructed and recycled, that material, reused and recycled. Composting toilets are becoming much more commonplace. So it's really, it's much more mainstream than it ever has been. This is just my personal feeling. I've found that there's a really strong tendency for a lot of people to want these simple technologically engineered answers to the problem of too much waste. But personally, I'm convinced that the truly sustainable answer is found in our own human behavior and our choice. Along with flexible focused technologies, anaerobic digestion. There's a lot more. This is a huge field for environmental engineers and environmental consultants and things. It's a huge field to be able to move in the direction of zero waste. So in essence, how do we move towards this? And this is a phrase that I think is just excellent. My last slide, I'll kind of give you a fun thing about this, but if it can't be reduced, reused, repaired, rebuilt, refurbished, refinished, resold, recycled, or composted, then it should be restricted, redesigned, or removed from production. That's how I think we're going to get as close to zero waste as possible. And then the question I say is, who wrote these words and in what year? And you will not be surprised that the Berkeley City Council, Berkeley, California, has always been way ahead on, and Boulder, places like that, have always been way ahead on in this field. And they created their zero waste resolution in 2005. But Pete Seeger wrote the lyrics and performed it when he was 89 years old in 2008. And I'm just going to play 2 seconds of this. Pete Seeger is very near and dear, was very near and dear to my heart. What his work has always been, because I grew up on the Hudson River in New York, and he had the clear water, and it was all about environmental education of how we need to clean up the river. And so I'll just play 2 seconds of this.
If it can't be reduced, reused, repaired, rebuilt, refurbished, refinished, resold, recycled, or composted. Then it should be restricted, redesigned, or removed from production. Hooray for the city of Berkeley. Hooray for the city of Berkeley. Hooray for the city of Berkeley and its zero waste commission.
To that next slide. So thank you very much, you guys, for listening. And I'm hoping that this use of time, that we made good use of the time.